Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into the olive-draped hills of southern Italy, where the morning mist doesn't just roll over the land, it hushes it. There's a certain chill that clings to your jacket just before sunrise in Reggio Calabria, a coastal city where the buildings lean like they've heard too many secrets. And just off a narrow back street, through a broken iron gate, someone you'd never notice steps outside with the day's first espresso. Pasquale Condello, an accountant officially, lives like fog, quiet, always there, and impossible to hold. You wouldn't last a week in his world, not because of bullets or betrayals, though there's plenty of both, but because silence like his takes decades to perfect. No flashy suits, no loud proclamations, just the slow hum of old ceiling fans, handshakes that mean something, and a brain that never stops calculating risk like it's breathing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing who's drifting off around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Pasquale's neighborhood is still asleep, but he's already dressed. Plain wool slacks, no tie, no watch, and always shoes he can walk quietly in. He doesn't drive himself anymore, not since the 90s, but his driver, an old cousin with a lopsided nose and a habit of humming opera, is always waiting, parked 3 streets away with a newspaper on his lap, pretending not to notice the cops who occasionally stroll past. They never stop him, not really. Reggio has a rhythm, and everyone who matters already knows the beat. Pasquale doesn't wave or nod. He just appears, slips into the back seat, and vanishes down a road lined with sun-bleached posters for politicians no one voted for. The car hums south toward a cafe with no name, where the espresso is bitter and the walls have never seen paint. There he meets 2 men who talk too much and think they talk too little. He listens. That's what Pasquale does. While they argue about territory, he stirs sugar into his cup, watching the reflection in the metal spoon. He says 5 words the entire meeting. But when the men leave, both believe the outcome was their idea. And Pasquale, of course, has what he wants. Silence, obedience, and the exact profit margin he calculated before the meeting even began. Many people still think that Pasquale's strength came from his invisibility, but maybe it was his predictability that made him untouchable. In a world of chaos, he was consistency wrapped in mystery. Later that day, a shipment of off-brand appliances from Romania docks quietly. It'll pass inspection, despite a false manifest and 3 extra crates. One of those crates has no paperwork, just cash, layered between cartons. The dock supervisor glances once, then twice, and walks away. Somewhere in the shadows, a middle-aged man nods and pockets a new phone. Pasquale doesn't show up. He never does. But his fingerprints, figuratively, are everywhere. The city itself seems built to protect him. Its narrow alleys, steep stone steps, and overgrown courtyards blur the line between today and some older, harder past. People hang laundry high above the streets, and the wind carries whispers from window to window. It's the kind of place where questions are answered with shrugs, and everyone's uncle used to know someone in the old days. Pasquale thrives here. Not in a throne room or behind a desk, but in the layered quiet, the way certain names vanish from reports, how a police chief takes early retirement without reason, or how a tax audit simply never happens. These aren't coincidences. They're the product of years of precise, quiet arithmetic. He doesn't intimidate, he reconciles. Not with words, but with numbers. He goes home at dusk. Not the same house he left from this morning. Never the same house twice in a row. Tonight, it's a villa once owned by a dentist who emigrated to Perth. The curtains are always closed. The refrigerator hums like a tired heartbeat, and there's only one lamp lit, just enough to review a ledger by hand. Always by hand. Pasquale doesn't trust screens. Ink, he believes, holds memory, and in that ledger, columns swell and shrink with a rhythm only he understands. One page lists funeral flower expenses. The next, import fees for espresso machines. Then there's a side note. Vincenzo. Too visible. That's all. No surname. But Vincenzo won't be in tomorrow's meeting. He'll get reassigned to Milan. Pasquale is already solving for the fallout. Outside, a stray dog barks. A light flickers once, then holds. Pasquale stands, stretches his back, and pours a final glass of water. He doesn't drink wine. Not anymore. Not since 1986. No one knows why. Do you remember the day he left with the first money? He was barely 30, carrying just a plastic bag and the address of a farmhouse. That plastic bag held more secrets than most men carry in a lifetime. He sleeps early, always before 10, and always with one ear open. But not for danger, for detail. A creak in the floorboards, the length of a silence, the weight of footsteps on gravel. He doesn't need protection. He needs prediction. As the Reggio streets dim under a thinning moon, Pasquale turns off the light, folds his hands on his chest, and lets the silence resume its watch. Tomorrow will bring more questions he won't answer. More money he'll make look smaller. And more people who believe they're making decisions, when in fact, they're only reacting to the ripples he set in motion days ago. The hills above Reggio Calabria rise in quiet tiers, dotted with olive trees older than some cities. Up here, where the air tastes of salt and stone, Pasquale's childhood lingers like smoke trapped in old rafters. It was in these hills, long before he became a whisper in financial records, that he first understood the value of discretion. His father was a mason, hands like stone, voice like gravel. His mother, a shadow in the kitchen, always 3 steps ahead of every conversation. And between them, little Pasquale learned to listen before he spoke, to calculate before he stepped. He was good with numbers before he even knew what a calculator was. While other kids played football with half-flat balls in the dust, he tallied the number of steps from the bakery to the church, figured out which windows never opened, and memorized every face that passed his family's modest home. Not because he was paranoid, because he was curious. The world spoke in patterns, and he loved nothing more than unraveling them quietly. By the time he reached 15, he was already doing sums for shopkeepers who didn't trust the bank. Cash boxes came to him for checking. He'd sit cross-legged on the cool tile floor and sort bills by cent and serial number. One old tobacconist swore Pasquale could spot counterfeit lira by touch alone. That was the year an uncle introduced him to someone called the Professor, a name that sounded harmless, but carried the weight of blood and debt in equal measure. The Professor wore clean shoes and asked no direct questions. Instead, he'd hand Pasquale puzzles, ledgers from fictitious companies, lists of goods that didn't exist, trucks that made trips no one saw. And Pasquale, in quiet afternoons between homework and dinner, solved them like riddles. He learned how to forget amounts, how to round numbers, until they disappeared. He understood how a business could be both bankrupt and booming, depending on which ledger you showed. That's when it began, the silent apprenticeship. No formal lessons, just soft nods of approval when he erased a line the right way, or replaced a number with an asterisk and no one asked why. His father noticed the new shoes, the clean shirt collars, but said nothing. That was how families worked here. Silence wasn't suspicion, it was respect. Many people still think that the Ndrangheta's power came from violence, but locals knew it came from accounting, from numbers that never quite added up, and yet always satisfied. That's where Pasquale excelled. He didn't need to raise his voice. By 19, he was handling cash routes between Gioia Tauro and Catanzaro. Not physically, he never touched the product, but his mind traced every note, every envelope, every delay. And when two couriers argued over lost earnings, Pasquale didn't accuse. He just paused, blinked slowly, and asked, "Do you remember where you refueled?" That was all it took. One admitted guilt. The other nodded and agreed to take a different route next time. No violence, no shouting, just calm recalibration. He earned a nickname by 22, Il Ragioniere, the accountant. But unlike most nicknames in this world, his didn't carry mockery. It carried deference. There's a wedding. August 1976. Thick heat settles like wet cloth on everyone's shoulders. The bride is crying before she even reaches the altar, probably from the heat, possibly from what she knows. Everyone's watching a man 2 rows back, not the ceremony. That man is Pasquale. Slim, in a dark suit, not quite smiling. He receives no greetings, yet everyone notices who greets whom and in what order. Even the priest glances at him before lifting the bread. At the reception, under paper lanterns and tired music, he barely speaks. But a chair is left empty next to him. One by one, men rotate into that chair, share 1-minute whispers, and leave again with napkins folded neatly in their jackets. Pasquale doesn't dance. He doesn't drink. But he leaves with 3 new agreements finalized and a change in who collects at the Gioia Tauro port. The groom has no idea that his honeymoon costs are now paid for by a trucking route he'll never see. That night, Pasquale writes one thing in his notebook. Weddings are liabilities. Prefer funerals. It's not just math with him, it's method. He believes emotion clouds profit. Celebrations create chatter. Mourning creates clarity. He begins to attend more funerals than weddings after that, dressed always in charcoal, blending in like an undertaker who brought no hearse. Do you remember the tobacconist from his childhood? The one who trusted him to count his cash? He's dead now. A quiet stroke. But Pasquale still visits the widow once a year with a bag of groceries and a folded letter from an old friend. No name, just a crisp $500 note. Loyalty, after all, isn't just emotional. It's excellent PR. By 30, Pasquale owns no cars, no homes, no land. But his name is whispered in rooms that handle all of those, and his strength doesn't come from absence. It comes from absolute calculation. Every presence is measured. Every visit is weighed. Even funerals are attended based on how many people he expects not to speak his name. Scholars still debate whether he ever held a formal title in the Ndrangheta hierarchy. Was he a boss, a consigliere, or just a facilitator? Many people still think that his power came from the vacuum he left behind. He didn't need a title when everyone came to him anyway. The hills again fall silent at night. You can hear a scooter backfire from 4 streets away, and somewhere, a phone rings exactly once, then stops. It was never meant to be answered. Pasquale lies awake, eyes open to the ceiling, counting not sheep, but exits. Always exits. Always numbers. Always tomorrow. There's a strange comfort in Calabrian weddings. Too many flowers, too many guests, too much food. But beneath all the lace and laughter, there's always a darker thread woven through the fabric of celebration. Everyone knows it. No one says it. And that's precisely why Pasquale Condello preferred them. Not for the dancing, not for the wine, for the data. He could read a wedding the way others read a ledger. Who walked in with whom? Who hugged too long? Who sat one chair too far from the boss? Weddings, he'd often note, were the only place a man forgot himself for just long enough to reveal everything. This one's in Saderno, a quiet coastal town where the sea sighs louder than the people. The sun slinks low, casting gold over the courtyard as tables are dressed in crisp linen. 100 guests, each pretending they aren't watching one another. But Pasquale? He's watching everyone. Not from the head table, of course. Never there. He sits halfway down, near the wine bar, always peripheral, always central in silence. To his left, a cousin by marriage leans in, asking if he's heard about the new syndicate moving in from Bari. Pasquale dips a piece of bread into oil and murmurs, "They'll need better shoes." No follow-up needed. The cousin knows that's not a joke, it's an observation. People with poor footwear don't last long on Calabrian gravel. Halfway through the meal, a toast is made. Glasses rise, cameras flash, and Pasquale subtly leans back in his chair, just far enough to catch a reflection in the catering van's side panel. He spots 3 men watching from the street. Not guests, not locals. That kind of gaze doesn't belong to someone looking for dessert. He doesn't panic. He just folds his napkin twice, excuses himself for air, and disappears behind the kitchen. By the time someone notices, he's gone. Later, 2 of those watchers are picked up in Cosenza. No one can link them to Pasquale. But someone whispers that one of them kept a crumpled piece of paper in his wallet, a street name in Reggio Calabria, unlabeled, untouched, just folded 6 times. Back in the car, Pasquale doesn't speak. His driver doesn't ask. They ride in silence through the olive groves, broken only by the occasional squeak of old brakes. Pasquale finally says, "It's always weddings. People speak too freely. Do you remember the professor? The man who gave young Pasquale his first false ledger to fix? He's long retired now, living in a coastal villa where no one visits. But once a year, a small envelope arrives by courier. Inside, a list of 5 names. No instructions, just names. Pasquale reads it over espresso and adds asterisks beside 2. By month's end, one relocates to Venezuela. The other is offered a bakery in Florence. A quiet way to say, "You're being moved." It's always that precise. In one summer alone, Pasquale is present at 4 weddings, 2 funerals, and a christening. Each event yields a different currency: information, leverage, debt, or doubt. He collects all, not in briefcases, but in memory. He keeps no files. His records are spatial, anchored to smells, faces, patterns of conversation. To observers, he appears forgetful, even aloof. But the truth is, he's just filtering for anomalies. One evening, at a wedding outside Locri, a man offers him a handshake with a slight hesitation. Just half a second. Just enough. Pasquale notices. Later, he asks quietly, "Did he bring a gift?" The answer, "No. That man is never invited again." Mainstream historians tend to overlook the role of these social rituals in organized crime, preferring the drama of shootouts or the scandal of courtrooms. But the real power moved beneath chandeliers and inside crowded courtyards. Pasquale's entire climb was built not on intimidation, but interpretation. He sits once at a table with a distant cousin of the Opetisano clan. The cousin boasts about a pending deal with a shipping company in Malta. Pasquale, without blinking, asks, "Why are their invoices backdated 6 weeks?" The cousin's smile fades. The next day, the deal is dead, and Pasquale's phone doesn't ring. That's how you speak loudly without volume. Many people still think that Pasquale relied on outside intelligence networks, that he had informants or bought secrets. But perhaps the truth is simpler. He watched. While others performed, he absorbed. He let everyone else overextend, overshare, overindulge. Then, like trimming fat from a ledger, he cut away the unnecessary. One humid night at a gathering in Rosarno, a glass shatters. A fight brews between two younger men, tempers high, blood hot from grappa and old grudges. Before fists fly, Pasquale stands, says nothing, and walks out. Everyone else quiets. The silence he leaves behind is heavier than any threat. From that day on, he stops attending weddings altogether. He starts sending envelopes instead. Small gifts, signed with a smiley face drawn in ink. No name, but everyone understands. It's not absence. It's presence in a higher form. The last wedding he's known to attend is the daughter of a mid-tier logistics operator. It takes place in 1989. After that, he fades from that circuit entirely. You could say Pasquale learned everything he needed to know from one too many canapes and the wrong man's shoes. By the early 90s, he begins preferring one-on-one conversations in empty cafes or grapevine-covered terraces. Just 2 chairs, 1 breeze, 1 conversation. Far fewer variables, far less noise, and back in the hills of Calabria, at the end of each of these delicate days, Pasquale still returns to silence. He takes off his shoes at the door. He folds his socks perfectly. He warms a small pot of lentils. He reads. Never novels, always old reports. He writes. Never stories, always numbers. He dreams of nothing. His sleep is blank. A different kind of classroom shapes Pasquale's life now. Not one with chalkboards or bells, but with murmurs that echo through narrow alleyways and contracts signed in invisible ink. There's no diploma at the end, no ceremony, just power, quietly handed off, like a warm coat in a cold place. His mentors, if you could call them that, don't wear robes. They wear musty wool coats, thick-framed glasses, and the kind of shoes that never squeak. Men with papery skin and papery morals. The type who speak in riddles, then leave before questions can follow. One taught him to balance a ledger so well that auditors gave up. Another showed him how to open a bottle of vintage Barolo with a twist that doubled as a threat. But Pasquale learns more from silence than from any advice. He watches how a room shifts when someone important walks in. He counts how long it takes for someone to reach for their wallet. He notes who never finishes their drink, because those are usually the ones with something to hide. He begins keeping different kinds of notebooks, mental ones. Not the spiral-bound kind, but the kind stitched into habits. He remembers the way people say, ciao. If it lands flat or lingers a second too long, it tells him something. He recalls who offers 2 kisses and who skips the second. These are metrics. Maybe not official ones, but they're measurable. And in Pasquale's world, everything measurable is manageable. At a gathering in a converted olive press, a man offers him a role, more direct, more visible. Pasquale declines with a shrug and the words, "I already have enough mirrors in my house." The room laughs. The offer dies, but the meaning is clear. Pasquale prefers to pull strings from behind the curtain, not dance under its light. He gets better at disappearing, not physically, though he'll eventually master that too, but socially. He's always just about to arrive, or just left, or caught up in something. People stop asking, and that's when you know you've truly vanished. One of the more senior figures in the Ndrangheta, an elder with milky eyes and a limp, takes a liking to Pasquale, not for his charm, which is minimal, but for his reliability. He describes Pasquale once as the only man I trust with numbers and secrets at the same time. High praise, especially in a world where secrets are more valuable than gold and numbers more dangerous than knives. Do you remember that cafe with no name? The one where the espresso bites back? That becomes Pasquale's unofficial headquarters. But only in myth. In reality, he never sits there more than 15 minutes, never orders the same thing twice, and never, ever uses the same sugar packet twice. He brings his own, folded into the lining of his jacket. By 1992, Pasquale has quietly become a central node in a decentralized empire. He doesn't control men. He doesn't need to. He controls decisions, the subtle tilts of approval, the absence of resistance, the quiet yes that feels like someone else's idea. A ship docks in Gioia Tauro. Officially, it's bringing furniture. Unofficially, it holds 400 kilos of cocaine. The customs documents are clean. The port officials, uninterested, and the ledger, balanced, perfectly. No fingerprints, no noise, just numbers. That's a Pasquale operation. Every variable accounted for, every outcome calculated 4 steps ahead. The man who oversees the drop-off has never met Pasquale, only heard of him. Still, he wears a new blazer to the port that day, just in case. Mainstream history books often credit these smuggling feats to brash dons with violent pasts. But many people still think that the real power came from back-office figures like Pasquale, the ones who never touched a gun but moved millions with a pen. He's not above fear. He just budgets for it. When a cousin is caught in a minor sting, unrelated, clumsy, Pasquale arranges a swift exit. Not by bribing a judge, but by relocating 2 witnesses to Switzerland, using airline vouchers redeemed under a religious charity. No trails, just grace. And that's the thing. His work, though criminal, feels almost ecclesiastical, ritualistic, as if each number matters not just because of what it represents, but because of how it sits on the page. Left justified, tight margins, no smudges, clean crimes. Do you remember how his mother used to move in the kitchen, always 3 steps ahead? Pasquale does. Every move she made was with purpose. That choreography stuck. In a way, she trained him better than any mentor. Her silence wasn't suppression, it was structure. And now, he brings that to the underworld. Sometimes he meets clients, usually businessmen with complicated tax problems, or politicians with overcomplicated appetites. These aren't shady figures with cigars and sunglasses. They're clean-cut, smiling, grateful. And Pasquale, wearing an ordinary gray jacket, gives them what they need. Plausible deniability, wrapped in financial clarity. They pay well. Not in bundles of cash, but in access. Phone numbers that work at odd hours, files that quietly vanish, meetings arranged with just enough plausible cause. And when he walks away from those meetings, he always does so on foot. He prefers the echo of his steps in old alleys, The sound tells him if anyone's following. One late afternoon, he sits with a notary in Catanzaro. The man has 3 kids, a second mortgage, and a silent panic behind his eyes. Pasquale slides him a folder labeled Archive and says, "These were never yours." The notary nods, signs a release form, and never asks what was inside. But he does take a sudden vacation to Malta 2 days later. Pasquale watches the ferry from a hillside vineyard and doesn't smile. He just nods once, then lights a cigarette. He doesn't smoke. He just needs the smoke sometimes to mark the moment. By the time Pasquale reaches his late 30s, the coastline becomes a partner, not a backdrop. A partner. The Calabrian seaboard isn't for tourists. Not really. It's rugged, weather-worn, and leans towards silence like a man avoiding a bar fight. It's here, along the moonlit docks of Gioia Tauro, that deals are inked not with pens, but with glances. Containers roll in by the hundreds every week, and most are just what they say: tiles, olive oil, car parts. But then there are the others, and those others are where Pasquale's fingerprints truly begin to appear. Never physically, of course. Always in the margins. Always in the way a crate's paperwork arrives 2 days early, or how a forgotten customs flag gets overwritten by an updated fax from an office that technically doesn't exist. He never sets foot on the port floor. That would be sloppy, predictable. Instead, he rents a second-floor room above a fishing tackle shop across the road. From there, he watches. He times the rhythm of security sweeps. He learns which port officials have back pain, because those are the ones who leave their posts earlier than they should. Which ones argue with their wives on the phone, and therefore miss shipments. Which ones whistle after they pocket an envelope. From up there, with espresso in hand and cheap curtains filtering the light, Pasquale watches history reshaping itself. Do you remember the man who offered him that direct role? The one with the room full of mirrors? That man's now dead. Not violently, not dramatically, just an overdose of stress and poor cholesterol. But his territory? Seamlessly absorbed. No headlines, no gunshots, just reallocated routes, realigned bribes, and revised contracts. Pasquale didn't make a move. He didn't have to. He'd already done the math 5 months prior. At a certain point, even rivals begin to refer to him differently. Not by name, he'd never allow that, but in phrases like the man with the books or the one who already knows. Sometimes they joke that he could calculate your betrayal before you even have the nerve to attempt it. And it isn't far from the truth. One afternoon, a shipment from Turkey arrives 4 hours early. That shouldn't happen. Ships don't beat the schedule. Pasquale notices immediately, not because he's told, but because a certain dock worker doesn't take his usual smoke break at the usual time. He makes one call. "Check crate 1912, he says. That's it. Inside? A tracker. Not a bomb, not a bug. Something more subtle. A device meant to log movement, who handled the goods, where they were stored. Police technology, most likely. Expensive and specific. The crate is repackaged and delivered to a warehouse that burned down later that week in a power accident. No arrests, no news. Pasquale's phone never rings again from that number. There's an older man who tends grapevines 2 hills inland from the port. Everyone thinks he's just another retired farmer. But twice a month, Pasquale visits. They sit on overturned crates, drinking lukewarm water and eating dry bread. No names are spoken, but after each visit, adjustments are made. Schedules shift, suppliers are changed, drivers rerouted. Many people still think that Ndrangheta logistics were run by a rotating group of regional bosses, but those who were really paying attention know Pasquale was the keystone. Quiet, unquestioned, almost boring, but essential. At night, in his farmhouse, yes, the one with no address, he writes by oil lamp. He keeps a stack of ledgers, not dated, not labeled, just codes. Every symbol, a story. Every margin, a whisper. The numbers don't just track shipments. They track people, reactions, habits, pauses in conversations that meant more than the words. There's a page titled Retardo, Italian for delay. On it, he lists names, not those who failed him, but those who hesitated. It's not punishment, it's preparation. A man who hesitates once might do it again. That's the kind of data that keeps you alive. Do you remember the shipment with the hidden cash, layered inside crates of fans from Romania? That wasn't an accident. That was Pasquale's test. The man overseeing the delivery wasn't informed. Pasquale wanted to know. Would he skim? Would he ask questions? Would he report it? He did none of those. That man was promoted, unofficially. Next month, he was coincidentally offered a better contract. His salary doubled. His name moved up the list in Pasquale's ledger, under a small check mark in red ink. He doesn't believe in second chances, but he believes in data that matures, that ferments, that proves itself. There's a beach town nearby, Silla, where Pasquale sometimes walks at night, not with bodyguards, alone. Just a light jacket, even when the sea breeze bites. He walks barefoot near the edge, letting the sand whisper up between his toes. To anyone watching, he looks like just another aging man processing regret. But Pasquale doesn't regret. He processes outcomes. That's different. On one of these walks, he's passed by a police patrol. 2 officers. One of them locks eyes with him for a moment too long. 2 days later, that officer is reassigned. No inquiry, no fuss. Just moved to Messina. Pasquale never says a word. And still, he's not rich in the way outsiders imagine. No villas in the Alps, no gold rings. His luxury is insulation, time, freedom from panic. That's wealth in his world. Many people still think that power comes from proximity to violence. Pasquale shows it can also come from meticulous avoidance of it, from slipping past it like water through fingers, from never being in the room where the shot is fired, but somehow always being in the room where the plan was drawn. Back at the port, the crates keep rolling. But now, they hum with a rhythm that only one man fully understands. A kind of music in motion, a Mathematics of Menace. And above it all, Pasquale watches, from behind the curtain, just where he likes it. It starts with a convoy, a line of dull gray trucks snaking through Calabria's back roads in the fog-soaked hours before dawn. There are no markings, no logos, just 3 identical vehicles and 6 men with the kind of eyes that don't blink at sirens anymore. Their destination is a warehouse on the edge of Crotone, or at least it was, because somewhere between turn 17 and 18 on a winding hill road, one of the trucks disappears. Not flipped, not hijacked, just vanished. It's the kind of thing that, in most organizations, would spark chaos. Panic, accusations, retaliation. But in Pasquale's world, it sparks calculation. The phone call arrives at 6:04 a.m., delivered by a driver who doesn't ask questions. Pasquale, in a modest kitchen that smells faintly of coffee and cold metal, sets down his cup and nods once. Then he says, "How many kilometers before the discrepancy?" No anger, no surprise, just arithmetic. The driver doesn't know how to answer. So Pasquale stands, wipes his fingers on a linen towel, and walks out without another word. He's already reconstructing the route in his mind, factoring terrain, elevation, signal blackouts, known police rotations, and, most importantly, weather. The truck was never meant to arrive, he later concludes. Not if one of the men inside decided it was more profitable to vanish than to deliver. But here's the thing about vanishing. It's much harder when your boss counts by kilometers, not by minutes. He replays everything from the beginning. Shipment logs, fuel receipts, road toll timestamps. Pasquale doesn't chase men, he chases numbers. And numbers, like rivers, always lead back to source. 2 days later, a mechanic in Vibo Valentia finds a scorched truck chassis buried beneath a tarp behind a closed auto shop. There's no cargo, no bodies, but the axles match. It's the missing truck. By that evening, Pasquale has already recovered 80% of the stolen shipment. Quietly. No one is arrested. No one dies. But 3 men find themselves reassigned, one to Brussels, one to Milan, and the last to a construction site in Taranto, where the pay is low and the heat unforgiving. Do you remember how he used to test his people with mislabeled crates and unmarked cash? This was the same, only scaled. And he'd anticipated it. There's a phrase that circulates afterward. Don't take what he hasn't forgotten. It becomes a quiet warning among port workers and drivers alike. Because if Pasquale lets it leave the warehouse, it's already on record. Maybe not paper, but memory. And memory is the one thing he guards more closely than money. Mainstream accounts of this event, if they even exist, chalk it up to logistics failure or unknown disruption. But many people still think that Pasquale let it happen, that he used the incident as a litmus test for loyalty. So, what do you think? Does an accountant really lose track of a truck? Or does he set it loose like bait and see who bites? In the weeks following the event, Pasquale refines his circle even further. He starts using men who don't know each other, routes that overlap but never intersect, ledgers written in double negatives, entries that subtract what isn't there to suggest what is. Only someone thinking in circles could even attempt to decode them. He returns to the no-name cafe near the port, sits alone with a small notebook, orders a macchiato and doesn't drink it. He's not there for flavor. He's there for tempo. A man enters, nods once, drops a folded newspaper on the table, and leaves. Inside, a photograph of a smiling customs officer from Bari. Pasquale draws a small circle in the corner and writes soft pressure in pencil. That officer takes a sabbatical 3 weeks later and never returns. Sometimes, Pasquale doesn't even need to act. His systems have become organisms, self-regulating, self-defending. He's not a kingpin. He's an immune system with a pulse. Do you remember the professor, the original mentor? One of the few who truly understood the depth of Pasquale's mind. He once said, "In this world, there are 2 kinds of power. The kind that walks into a room, and the kind that makes everyone else sit up straighter before it does." Pasquale was always the second kind. He never sought revenge when the truck vanished, only correction. His kind of justice isn't loud. It's deeply inconvenient. A lost promotion, a suddenly cold bank account, a wife offered a job in Bologna, far from home. The punishment is in the pause, in the way someone begins to wonder if they made the wrong choice, and realizes it too late. The missing truck becomes legend, not because of what it carried, but because of how little fallout followed. No sirens, no shootouts, just subtle shifts. One shop closes, another opens. One man leaves the country. Another returns with gray in his hair. A year later, when a journalist from Turin whispers about an incident involving a criminal convoy, no one will speak. Not out of fear, but out of reverence. Because in Calabria, the absence of violence is sometimes more intimidating than the threat of it. And Pasquale? He moves on, adjusts 3 routes, promotes 1 driver, sends a fruit basket to a grandmother in Saderno whose nephew once turned in a lost invoice without being asked. Because in his world, integrity isn't flashy. It's folded into the margin between predictability and risk. And while others raise armies, Pasquale sharpens patterns. Like a tailor, invisible but essential, stitching the hem of a criminal empire without ever getting blood on the thread. Some men climb through blood, others through favors. Pasquale? He climbs through math. It's not dramatic. There are no grand gestures, just the quiet click of logic, the way numbers lock into place like teeth in a perfect gear. Violence may grab headlines, but margin control? That's how empires survive. And Pasquale knows this better than anyone. He begins to rise not through title, not by succession, but through necessity. Every time a problem arises that the others can't fix, he's called. Not for decisions, but for definitions. He frames the question in a way that makes the answer inevitable. The men around him begin to realize if Pasquale says it balances, it balances. His power then isn't seized, it's offered. There's a moment, subtle, quiet, and utterly symbolic, when a known enforcer from Catanzaro tries to contradict him during a meeting. They're discussing payouts from a shell company tangled in fishery exports. The enforcer insists that the numbers don't line up. Pasquale, without raising his voice, just places a napkin between them. On it, he writes 1 word, double. Then he stands, walks out. The meeting ends 5 minutes later. That enforcer is never invited again. What was the word for? Double the payout? Double entry accounting? Double the consequences? No one asks. They all get the message. From then on, Pasquale doesn't attend every meeting. He doesn't have to. Decisions begin to orbit his preferences. Men send couriers with ledgers before voting on proposals. His opinion is consulted before a wedding is planned, a shipment scheduled, or a new partner considered. He's never voted into power. He simply becomes inevitable. There's an abandoned farmhouse outside Gerace, ivy-crushed walls, a rusted gate, and a fireplace that hasn't seen flame in years. But the floorboards have been reinforced, and beneath them sits a room, barely lit, faintly damp, filled with nothing but ledgers. Pasquale keeps no guards there, no keys, no locks, because only he knows how to read them. The books look like nonsense to anyone else. Pages of short phrases, April drift, Raphael late again, reduced tide 5%. No context, no amounts, just triggers, reminders, each one linked to a pattern stored only in Pasquale's mind. A university professor once wrote a paper on cognitive criminal architecture. He argued that the most dangerous minds in organized crime weren't those with plans, but those who were plans. Systems disguised as people. Many people still think that essay was written about Pasquale, though it never names him. So what do you think? Can a man become a machine without losing his soul? Pasquale doesn't lose his soul. He just puts it in storage. And his rise, if you can call it that, changes little about his habits. He still eats alone, still walks in silence, still rides in the back seat of modest Fiats, never armored cars. The only difference is the way people look at him now. with that slight lean back, that careful pause, like standing too close might blur the margins of your own identity. There's a Sunday market in Bovolino where he sometimes strolls. He buys anchovies in brown paper, examines garlic like it holds secrets, and listens. Not to conversations, those are rarely interesting. He listens to intonation, how quickly vendors respond, whether a question is deflected or answered. That's what tells him if someone's under pressure. On one particular Sunday, a young seller hesitates before quoting a price. Just half a second. Pasquale notes it. Later that week, he learns the boy's father is behind on a loan to a minor affiliate of a rival clan. Pasquale intervenes, quietly, indirectly. The debt is consolidated into a bakery deal. The boy never knows why things eased. But the next Sunday, his hands don't shake when he offers Pasquale figs. It's not just calculation anymore, it's choreography. Do you remember the banker who vanished after a poorly timed audit? That incident taught Pasquale that visibility could be a weapon. Not every enemy needed removal. Some just needed a spotlight, so he begins experimenting. A courier is told to deliver a package to a cafe where a known informer likes to sit. The package contains nothing, but word spreads. The informer relocates to Turin within a week. No confrontation, just implication. Another man, too curious, too chatty, is invited to a meeting that never happens. He waits alone for 3 hours, then receives a note. Punctuality is your strength. That man starts avoiding any gathering involving Pasquale's network. A ghost strategy. Manipulation through suggestion. Pasquale's ascent is now complete. He's not a boss in any traditional sense. He gives no orders, demands no tribute. But the air shifts when his name is mentioned. Rooms grow quieter. Plans slow down, waiting for his invisible approval. Mainstream media rarely notices him. When they do, it's brief. A footnote in articles about drug corridors and inland smuggling routes. An alleged figure with suspected influence. The journalists who try to dig deeper usually quit or transfer desks. Not because they're threatened, because they find nothing. Just silence. Or worse, contradiction. Even the police reports are full of ellipses and conditionals. He may have been present. There is some belief. It is unclear. That's not an oversight. That's the point. And in the meantime, Pasquale remains unchanged. Still walks the same beach road. Still writes on the same kind of paper. Still folds his shirts with deliberate care. His empire is made of quiet things. And those are the hardest things to topple. In Calabria, the wind tells stories. It rustles olive trees like they're whispering about old debts. It whistles through alleyways shaped by centuries of watchful quiet. And if you stand still long enough, it might carry a name, or at least the echo of one. Pasquale Condello doesn't walk into that wind. He leans into it, as if expecting to hear something useful. By now, his movements are less frequent, but more impactful. One step from Pasquale ripples through 5 provinces. A decision he makes today won't register until 3 months later, when someone somewhere is quietly promoted, demoted, or simply removed. He's become the algorithm behind the Ndrangheta's structure, the invisible framework holding together a system designed to obscure itself. And with power comes precision, especially with communication. Phone calls? Rare. Almost mythical. If a number rings and the voice on the other end is Pasquale, the recipient knows 3 things. This call is the first and last. What's being said was already decided. The consequences of misunderstanding will not arrive loudly, but they will arrive. He once calls a lawyer in Rome to confirm the transfer of a vineyard. That vineyard changes ownership legally, smoothly, with no signatures traced. 6 months later, the lawyer gets promoted to a regional judge. Coincidence? Maybe. But the wine still flows from that vineyard, now carrying labels no one can trace to any business. Yet it always ends up in the right restaurants. And even more fascinating, Pasquale never drank wine, he just understood its margins. There's another kind of call. The non-call. The silent message. The folded paper. The dead SIM card placed under a bench near a train station in La Mezzia Terme. Someone finds it, inserts it into an old Nokia, and reads one name. Luigi. Reduce contact. That's it. Just those words. Luigi is never seen again in the regional circles. Word is, he took a job in Germany. Another says he was married off to a distant cousin in Sardinia. Whatever the truth, Pasquale doesn't check. He only checks the outcome. Quiet. Many people still think that criminal empires are held together by fear. But Pasquale's empire runs on precision. When things go wrong in his world, they don't erupt, they fade. A man who fails doesn't scream. He just moves, vanishes, and no one replaces him unless the system demands it. There's a villa outside Palmi, a structure that, from the street, looks abandoned. Faded shutters, cracked paint. But beneath the surface, it's alive. Inside, Pasquale holds ledger meetings, not with gangsters, but with accountants, real ones, suits and briefcases, men who moonlight as civil engineers, tax consultants, and corporate strategists. They come in pairs. They leave separately. None speak each other's names aloud. Inside, the table has no corners. A perfect circle. Everyone sees everyone. But the ledgers, they're custom-made, with wax-sealed pages and hand-drawn margins. They're not just books, they're instruments. In one of those ledgers, there's a diagram, a circular flow. Money from Spain to Milan to Reggio, then into shell corporations in Brazil, back to construction in Naples, then right back through real estate in Albania. One loop. All clean, all quiet. The accountant reviewing it says, "You don't need this many layers." Pasquale replies, "No, but I need them to sleep." He says it plainly, no sarcasm. Because that's the truth. His sleep depends not on trust, but insulation. And sleep does matter to him, oddly enough. He guards it like a treasure. Sleeps early. Sleeps cold. Windows open, even in winter. Because wind, he says, carries warning better than locks do. Do you remember that tunnel beneath his vineyard? The one dug quietly, with no permits, no blueprints, just persistence? It's now part of his sleep schedule. At night, he walks it end to end, not because he fears attack, but because he likes to remind himself that escape, too, is a form of planning. He knows every crack in its walls, every drip. It smells of damp earth and distant resolve. There's a moment, short but strange, when a drone is spotted circling above a known associate's compound in Siderno. The police blame journalists. The journalists deny everything. But Pasquale doesn't panic. Instead, he mails an envelope to a retired postal worker who once managed route logistics during the 1980s. Inside the envelope, a map of postal hubs in Sicily, a single red line drawn through them, and the phrase, "Too many eyes, too few letters." Within days, one of the regional offices moves location. Completely. The drone is never seen again. This is how he operates now. Through implication. through leverage pulled from unrelated domains. He'll bend the weather report if he needs to. Mainstream coverage, when it exists, always falls short. They call him a ghost, a mystery, but they miss the nuance. Pasquale isn't hiding. He's hollowing. He's turning presence into absence, identity into utility. And most days, he's not even in Calabria, not physically at least. A clerk in Zurich notices that someone keeps renting safety deposit boxes under rotated initials. Always punctual, always sterile. The keys arrive in envelopes lined with newspaper from Rome. No names, just precision. So what do you think? Can someone become so removed from identity that he becomes pure influence? Pasquale isn't trying to rule. He's trying to evaporate. Rome never really sleeps, but it has moments where it pauses. At 3:47 a.m., for instance, near the western end of Via Veneto, the city breathes like an old man between dreams. Streetlights flicker in rhythm with distant sirens, and somewhere inside the Hotel Excelsior, on the 5th floor, in a room that doesn't appear in the online registry, Pasquale sits in a velvet chair with his back to the window. The room is not for sleep, it's for sorting. Across from him, 2 men wait for permission to speak. One adjusts his cufflink. The other tries to control his breathing. On the low table between them is a folder marked Aqua Chiara Holdings. Inside, falsified shipping manifests, cash flow projections, and proof of a laundering chain that runs from Naples to Zurich and back again. Pasquale doesn't read. He listens. The man on the left begins explaining. His voice is steady, but too fast. He outlines routes, bank branches, contingency measures. The man on the right remains silent. He knows the numbers by heart. Pasquale tilts his head just slightly, interrupts with a single question. Who pays the electricity on the 4th branch? Silence. They weren't ready for that, and Pasquale knows it, because that's where weakness hides, in the trivial. Anyone can memorize big numbers, but only those who understand the ecosystem know to audit the light bulbs. Eventually, the silent man responds. A shell firm, registered in Rijeka. Pasquale nods once. Stands. The meeting's over. By morning, the company will exist on paper only. Its operations will fold into a new entity registered in Andorra. And none of it will trace back to the 5th floor room that doesn't exist. This is what he does now. He doesn't broker deals. He dissolves them, rearranges them until they look like they were always legal, or never existed. And Rome, for all its pomp, is just another corridor in his architecture. Do you remember that gathering in the Roman hotel? The banquet where he caught the attention of top bosses? That was decades ago, but the echoes of it still roll forward. That night proved something to everyone. Pasquale wasn't just effective. He was inevitable. From the moment he sat at that table, there was no going back. He never moved to Rome, of course. He dislikes permanence. But his influence now lives in the capital like smoke in the upholstery. Pervasive, difficult to trace, impossible to scrub out. There's a real estate firm in Trastevere that specializes in renovating historical apartments. Behind its unassuming door, the firm's ledgers are pristine. Too pristine. Every 4th file, if you check, includes a minor overpayment flagged as structural retainer. No one asks what that means. Every 4th file leads back to someone who once stood near Pasquale. That's not coincidence. That's network theory in motion. He doesn't rely on intimidation. He relies on inertia. Once something begins in his orbit, it continues unless acted upon. And nothing acts upon it. When the Vatican Bank faces scrutiny for certain offshore behaviors, Pasquale is nowhere in the documents, but one of the consultants brought in to stabilize the situation former roommate of a man who once poured wine at a Pasquale wedding. A long time ago. Details no one would notice, unless they knew what to look for, and he makes sure that no one ever fully knows what to look for. Mainstream scholars still argue whether Pasquale was a central strategist in international laundering circuits, or just a regional accountant who got too smart to catch. Many people still think he simply had good lawyers. But here's the truth. He rewrote the rulebook so that good lawyers couldn't keep up. One legal investigator in Milan reportedly said, "Every time we got close, the floor moved." That same investigator now teaches compliance law in Lisbon. Some call it retirement. Others call it quiet relocation. Pasquale wouldn't call it anything. He'd just mark it in the margin of a notebook as pressure drop successful. And yet, through all this, he maintains a strange kind of modesty. He never flaunts wealth, lives in rotation, moves between farmhouses, hotels, short-term flats registered to shell firms owned by deceased cousins. One of his favorite places is a single-room studio in the town of Orvieto, overlooking cliffs, fog rolling in like a sigh. No Wi-Fi, no television, just a kettle, a cot, and 3 books. All non-fiction, all about systems. He once tells a guest, "I don't care who rules, I care who calculates." And it shows. He lets others take credit now. Lets them rise. Lets them become visible. Even as they posture and pose, Pasquale watches from the side, weighs their moves, measures their margins. Do you remember how, at the beginning, he used to do the books for the tobacconist? How he sat cross-legged and counted every note by hand? That boy didn't vanish. He just grew sharper. He just scaled his discipline until entire economies bent to it. And so, as Rome settles again into its humid lull, somewhere in a quiet room, a man without a title, without a desk, and without a digital trail, takes a sip of bitter espresso. He doesn't smile, but he approves. By the mid-1990s, Pasquale Condello is no longer rising. He's settled, not like concrete or stone, more like fog. He doesn't climb anymore. He saturates. Calabria, Naples, Rome, and beyond. He isn't moving through them. He's present in them, without footprint, without fingerprint. And from this new altitude, he no longer needs to seek meetings. The meetings come to him. In the spring of '96, inside a crumbling villa deep in Aspromonte, 7 men gather around a table scarred by cigarette burns and old wine stains. They represent the clans of the South, the Ndrangheta's many heads, each one leaning toward the others like wolves in low conversation. Pasquale is the last to arrive. He says nothing for the first 20 minutes. The discussion is fractious. Someone wants more muscle in Milan. Someone else is bleeding cash in Florence. There's a shipping delay in Puglia. Whispers of unrest in the ranks. The usual. Then Pasquale clears his throat. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't accuse. He doesn't posture. He simply says, "There are too many receipts." The room falls quiet. What follows isn't a command. It's a recalibration. He slides forward a hand-drawn map. Not geographic, but relational. Names, arrows, pressure points. Not who controls what, but who affects what. It's a masterclass in consequence. From that point on, Pasquale isn't just respected. He's consulted, and not as a peer. As an arbiter, his role in the Ndrangheta evolves into something closer to that of a quiet Supreme Court. He's not the Don. He's the filter through which every good idea passes, and every bad idea dies silently. There's a term that emerges. Half affection, half fear. Il bilanciere, the balancer. The name sticks. From a distance, Pasquale seems unchanged. He still wears the same style of wool coats, still eats lentils, still takes long walks at dusk, but underneath, his reach has become layered. No single person controls the South anymore, not in name. But everyone agrees that if Pasquale disagrees, nothing moves. And what makes it unsettling is this: he rarely disagrees. He just recalculates. Do you remember the quiet meetings in the circular room with ledgers written in wax-sealed code? That system now extends to 3 more locations, each one staffed by a single person who doesn't know the others. Pasquale refers to them by scent. The citrus man, the one who smells of chalk, the woman with peppered breath. No names. That's how tightly the system is built. One day, a minor distributor from Campania tries to bypass the flow, sets up his own route, independent of approval. The shipment makes it halfway to Genoa before customs randomly selects it. Inside, nothing illegal, but enough inconsistencies to raise questions. Enough paperwork anomalies to trigger a cascade. The distributor loses his trucks, his clients, his license. He's never warned, never confronted. But he receives a letter 2 weeks later. Inside, nothing but an old flattened bus ticket from Reggio to Gioia Tauro, dated 1983, the day Pasquale first took over his uncle's accounts. No message, just memory. That's how correction works under Pasquale. He believes in correction more than punishment. Violence disrupts. Correction resets. He once told a logistics man, "The threat should never arrive faster than the invoice." A strange mantra, but one that his network begins to understand intimately. Mainstream analysts still try to label him boss, consigliere, ghost. But none of these are accurate. He's not a role. He's a result. When systems fail, he is what remains. So, what do you think? Can someone become the outcome of an entire underworld? Not its face, not its name, its inevitability? That spring, he begins spending more time in Aspromonte, not for hiding, but for observation. The mountains give him what cities never could: distance. He watches his systems like a meteorologist watches wind, not to control it, but to predict. He walks through pine groves where old weapons were once buried. He sits on flat stones where deals were once struck in whispers. He hears nothing but the birds and the low rush of leaves. But his mind runs simulations constantly. One of them involves a potential crackdown in Bari, another a betrayal in Bologna. He doesn't act on them yet. Instead, he rebalances a payment structure to make betrayal less useful. He alters delivery schedules to confuse routine surveillance, and he makes sure that everyone down the ladder earns just enough to stay loyal, and not quite enough to become ambitious. That's balance. That's design. Do you remember how his mother used to be 3 steps ahead in the kitchen? How every motion was premeditated? That choreography became his blueprint. A visit comes, unexpected, but not unanticipated. A bishop from Locri, one who's always had neutral politics and suspiciously well-funded youth programs, asks to see him. Pasquale receives him in a crumbling monastery surrounded by sheep. No guards, no notes. The bishop thanks him for a donation he didn't send. Pasquale replies, "Then it must have come from the right hands." The meeting lasts 14 minutes. When the bishop leaves, a stone mason waiting nearby is given new blueprints for a community center. 3 weeks later, construction begins with quiet backing from 3 shell firms. The money never passes through Pasquale's fingers, but the blessing does. He starts to withdraw a little more after that, not from control, but from presence. He skips meetings, sends proxies, stops visiting certain restaurants. He becomes harder to trace, deliberately, not out of fear, out of choice, because once you've built a system that sustains itself, being seen is just vanity, and Pasquale has never had time for vanity. Deep in the Aspromonte woods, there's a place known to a few old-timers as La Foresta dei Fantasmi, the Forest of Ghosts. It's not marked on maps. You have to know the turn past the crumbling chapel, cross a dry stream bed, and follow a path that no longer looks like a path. But if you reach the clearing at dawn, with fog still laced through the trees like gauze, you'll find a stone circle, weather-worn, half-sunk, and oddly deliberate. That's where they meet now, not every month, not on a schedule. But when the silence begins to crackle, when things stir just under the surface, Pasquale convenes what some in the organization call the Forest Court. He never calls it that. To him, it's just a conversation. But the men who arrive, none of them young, all of them seasoned, don't bring phones, don't bring guns, just old coats and older debts. There's no talking until Pasquale speaks, and when he does, it's with a pace that slows the blood. He mentions a port shift in Palermo, a construction permit that arrived too fast, a nephew who brags too loud. He doesn't accuse, he describes. And the room, if you can call a circle of stones a room, adjusts accordingly. This is the part of power no one teaches. Not the deals or the calculations, but the weathering. The part where you become a force of nature, where your silence begins to shape decisions more than your words ever could. Pasquale has arrived there now. Do you remember the banker who disappeared and was never found? His final transaction took place in a company that now builds prefab housing for municipalities in northern Italy. That company? Quietly thriving. Its books? Spotless. And guess who reviews them once a quarter? Not Pasquale directly, but a consultant who reports only to a mailbox in Rossano. That mailbox is emptied by a boy who thinks he's delivering mail to a retired school teacher. He's not. This is what Pasquale has created. A machine where even the parts don't know their parts. He once described his ideal system as a cathedral built by termites. Quiet, in motion, sustained without celebration. So what do you think? Can something that's never named outlive the men who built it? Many people still think that Pasquale led through charisma or intellect or cunning, but the truth is simpler. He led by removal. Every excess trimmed, every noise softened. He turned the organization into a place where the absence of chaos became its own kind of gospel. In one particular forest meeting, he does something no one expects. He smiles, just slightly. As a man from Locri finishes a nervous proposal involving ferry routes and casino fronts in Slovenia, Pasquale doesn't nod, doesn't speak. He just lets the smile linger. Later, that man will tell others, he didn't even say yes, but it was the best approval I've ever received. The project moves forward, quietly, successfully. That's the weight of his stillness. At night, when Pasquale returns to whatever house he's using that week, a farmhouse, a rented room above a butcher's shop, an apartment with shuttered windows and a view of nothing, he removes his shoes slowly, places them side by side, then sits and writes, always by hand, always the same pen. Tonight's entry: too many men chasing applause. Applause is expensive. Then, Luigi mentioned again, still waiting. Then nothing, just space, because even his ledgers breathe. He no longer checks news sites, no longer reads reports. Others do that. He reads silence, the gaps, the missing lines. A man who was always visible in the background of group photos is no longer there? That's an alert. A cousin who posts less frequently? That's a pressure point. A driver who changes his route twice without cause? That's a fracture. And still, Pasquale sleeps well, sleeps early, sleeps long, not because he trusts the world, but because the world now moves to his rhythm. Do you remember how his ledgers once tracked even the length of silences in conversations? That detail hasn't faded. He once tells a young intermediary, if a man pauses longer than 3 seconds before agreeing, he's calculating his version of the deal, not yours. That intermediary writes it down, later becomes head of logistics in the Tyrrhenian corridor, and still, Pasquale refuses to hold a title. He turns down every official seat at every table, lets others sign the documents, shake the hands, pose for the photos. He remains the one who corrects margins. At his core, he's still the boy counting coins on the cool tile floor of his family's kitchen, still measuring weight, still keeping score in his head. He just does it now on a scale that spans countries, currencies, and timelines. There's an expression whispered in the Calabria underworld now, not shouted, never written. He balances blood with books. It's not meant literally, of course. Pasquale Condello has never shed a drop with his own hands. But the phrase sticks. Because over time, people come to realize something deeply unsettling. Pasquale doesn't prevent violence. He absorbs it. It begins with a feud. 2 rival factions within the Ndrangheta, one rooted in old grudges from the hills of San Luca, the other newer, younger, hungry for recognition. Tensions rise over a shipment that went missing near the French border. One side blames the other. One warehouse burns. A nephew gets his ribs broken in Messina. Someone leaks a name to a journalist. That's when Pasquale gets involved, not by showing up. He doesn't travel to these fires. He makes a phone call to a man who once taught chemistry at a high school in Locri. The man left teaching after his brother was killed in a botched robbery, and now runs a logistics company with an uncanny success rate. Pasquale asks only one thing. What's your quietest truck? The man doesn't hesitate. The Blue DAF, 300,000 kilometers, never searched once. 3 days later, the blue truck drives through the disputed territory, carrying nothing but office chairs and a folder labeled Tax Archive 1992. In the glove compartment, 2 unsigned contracts and a third document, an agreement, split evenly between the 2 factions, with projected profits and delivery timelines. All the numbers are circled. All the names are left blank. By the time the truck finishes its route, no one knows who agreed first. But the feud ends, quietly. No apologies. Just recalibration. That's how Pasquale operates now. His name is a synonym for resolution, not peace. He doesn't believe in peace. He believes in function. Peace is emotional. Function is efficient. Do you remember the man who once described Pasquale as the only one I trust with numbers and secrets at the same time? That man is now a ghost, vanished, presumed dead, though no one really believes it. His absence becomes legend too, and somewhere in an attic in Salerno, someone finds a ledger with his handwriting, next to a note in Pasquale's script, removed to preserve rhythm. It's not cruelty, it's composition. Pasquale's worldview is built on rhythm, not power, not domination, but the steady drumbeat of cause and effect. You disrupt that rhythm, and you don't just create chaos, you create noise, and noise is unforgivable. He stops attending even the rare gatherings now, sends proxies with strict rules. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not offer opinion. Do not smile. Because even body language is a kind of variable. At this stage, Pasquale isn't organizing crime. He's organizing entropy. A rival clan from Campania tries to edge into his shipping routes by partnering with a Romanian front. Pasquale learns about it not through spies or reports, but through a change in warehouse rent prices in a district of Milan. That change tells him the Romanians are overextending. They're investing. That means leverage. He arranges to quietly buy the third-tier supplier. Not the Romanian front, not the flashy name, just the company that provides crates to the Romanian front. Within 2 months, delays begin. Shipments arrive with mismatched packaging. Clients complain. Trust erodes, and the rival clan withdraws. No blood, just paperwork. Many people still think that Pasquale succeeded because of the fear he inspired. But really, it was the uncertainty. The way he made every move feel like a misstep, like the floor might tilt at any moment. So what do you think? Can a man command loyalty by simply making disloyalty too complicated? He still keeps his own rhythms, still wakes early, still walks at twilight, still writes by hand. One day, in a small farmhouse near Tarianova, he sits by the window and watches the rain. Beside him, a notebook with only 3 lines written that week. Too many small fires. Need a new silence. Graziano no longer listening. That last one worries him. Not because Graziano might rebel. Pasquale has no fear of rebellion. What concerns him is unpredictability. A man who stops listening starts improvising. And improvisation can't be charted. It can't be modeled. Pasquale doesn't act yet. He watches, waits. Patterns always reveal themselves in time. That's what he learned from his mother, from the kitchen, from the way she knew when the sauce was ready just by the weight of the air. You don't rush readiness. Still, he prepares. He reroutes 3 small cash flows, adjusts 2 account timings, removes Graziano's name from a shared storage unit in Salerno. All quiet moves. Graziano never notices, but by the time he does, his influence will have narrowed to a hallway and a chair. Correction, not confrontation. Pasquale's old driver, yes, the cousin with the off-key opera voice, is now retired, lives in a seaside town, sells newspapers, still receives envelopes from Pasquale on his birthday. Inside, not money, not a message, just a clipping from a crossword puzzle they once joked about, folded neatly, timed perfectly, because Pasquale never leaves connections messy. Even his kindness is filed. He once said in a rare moment of conversation, "There are no loose ends, only lazy knots." And in the underworld he's designed, everything is tied, tightly, quietly, invisibly. Even as Calabria hums on with its church bells and sea winds, with its late-night scooters and espresso bars, the people who matter know. Pasquale is still adjusting levers, still balancing weight, still measuring the pause between action and echo. And the forest of ghosts? Still there, still waiting. There's a small house just outside Bova Marina, whitewashed, windowless on one side, with a fig tree that leans like it's eavesdropping. The driveway is gravel, the door unpainted, the mailbox taped shut with a strip of cloth. From the outside, it looks forgotten, but inside, every object is precisely placed, not decorated, arranged. This is Pasquale's favorite place, not his home. He doesn't believe in homes. He believes in locations of function. But this particular house serves one function better than most: thinking. He arrives just after dawn, alone, no escort, no car waiting in the road. He lets himself in with a key no one knows exists, sits at a simple pine table, and prepares to work. Not on numbers, but on pressure. Pasquale has begun mapping influence decay. Not territory, not profit, but where attention begins to wobble, where loyalty leans. It's a graph built not on dollars, but on inertia. For instance, a nightclub in Cosenza has seen 3 months of unusually slow foot traffic. Not a concern on its own. But when paired with the fact that the bartender's brother has started applying for military service, and the landlord's name was recently spotted in a minor procurement contract, Pasquale sees slippage. He underlines the club's name once, circles it in blue ink, then writes, "Redirect narrative, add noise." That's his version of a solution. Later that week, a pop-up gambling raid occurs nearby. The press jumps. The headlines spin. The nightclub returns to anonymity. Balance restored. This is what he does now. Sublimate pressure. Disperse it like mist through a system so vast, no single pulse ever feels the full weight. Do you remember the phrase Pasquale once used? No loose ends, only lazy knots. He applies it now to entire cities. Each person is a thread, and he knots them not with force, but with purpose. He ensures no one feels alone, yet no one feels secure enough to drift. It's pastoral, in a way. Like tending vines. You trim some, redirect others, allow a few to wither, but always with reason. Pasquale doesn't react to problems. He absorbs their outlines and starves them of momentum. A man begins to question too loudly. His sister suddenly receives a scholarship to teach abroad. A lieutenant grows too ambitious. His wife's boutique is quietly audited and found wanting. Punishment isn't the point. The pause is, because when people pause, they recalculate. And in that recalculation, Pasquale always inserts a variable, something they didn't expect, didn't plan for. A gentle reminder that entropy has a signature, and it's his. There's a story that circulates among the younger affiliates now, about a man who tried to rob one of Pasquale's safe houses. The safe had no cash, just a small photograph of a young boy counting coins on a tile floor, and a handwritten note that said, "Do you still know the difference between gain and leverage?" The man left Calabria the next day. No one's seen him since. Pasquale isn't sentimental, but he's fond of symbols. He keeps 3 on him at all times. A pencil stub sharpened so often it's barely usable. A small iron key, purpose unknown to everyone but him. A folded receipt from a cafe in Reggio, dated 1981, total 4,200 lire. Each one serves as ballast. Memory that doesn't need explanation, just presence. One night, in the Bova Marina house, he stirs lentils in a pot and thinks about erosion. Not natural, but social. He sees how systems degrade, how time softens vigilance. He knows that even the strongest structure can fail if left unattended, so he builds rotations, layers of control that replace themselves. A manager in Genoa is replaced not by his second, but by a cousin in Bergamo who has no enemies. A distributor in Palermo gets a sudden sabbatical, disguised as a heart condition. He's sent to Zurich for recovery, but he returns with a different name and no interest in reclaiming his former role. Pasquale calls this future-proofing. Most bosses fear betrayal. Pasquale fears stagnation. Do you remember the old professor who gave him his first ledger? That man now lives in an assisted care facility. Still lucid, still sharp. Pasquale visits once a year, always with flowers, never speaks of business. But once, before leaving, he asked the old man, "Do you think we ever finish learning?" The professor smiled, leaned in and said, "Only when we forget how to forget." Pasquale never forgot that line, because forgetting is his craft. Vanishing by design, not disappearance through fear, but through disinterest. People stop asking about you when you stop leaving footprints. There's a police report in Milan that mentions a suspect who matched the general appearance of Pasquale Condello. But the description is vague, shorter than expected. Glasses, perhaps. The man vanished before confirmation. Pasquale reads the report, smiles. He'd been in Zurich that day, or at least someone had used his code to enter a building. These days, his movements are like decoy flares, designed to distract, to scatter attention, to leave just enough heat to make you look in the wrong place. He once said to an associate, "I don't need to vanish if I was never there." And increasingly that becomes true. He leaves fewer marks, writes fewer notes, speaks less. But the system moves better. And that's the dream, not legacy, frictionless presence. The vineyard lies just beyond our door, tucked against a bend in the road few outsiders notice. From above, it looks like any other. Rows of vines hugging the hillside, the occasional patch of dry stone wall buckling from age. But underneath it, a different kind of root system runs. The tunnel begins beneath a rusted irrigation tank, camouflaged by overgrowth, masked by time. It descends gradually, steps carved into clay, the air shifting from the sweet tang of grapes to the damp breath of earth. No one stumbles into it. You'd have to know the weight of the trap door, the softness of the hinge, the rhythm of the lock. Pasquale Condello did not build this tunnel for escape. That's what everyone assumes, and they're wrong. He built it for clarity, because when you walk through silence with no phone, no watch, and no company, thoughts line up better. In this tunnel, decisions become tactile. The weight of dirt presses judgment into shape, and the low sound of your own breath, echoed, reminds you you're real and fallible. He doesn't go there often, but when he does, he stays for hours. There's a bench at the end, carved into the wall, where he once sat and made 3 decisions in a row that changed the shape of the southern drug corridor. One involved removing a middleman who had grown too theatrical. Another, an agreement with a Catalan broker who didn't know who he was dealing with. The third, letting a man fall, not to death, but into debt, because sometimes a man learns better when he loses everything but his usefulness. Pasquale calls it educational freefall. Do you remember the rival who tried to muscle in from Campania? The one who thought alliances with Balkan groups would shield him? He never received a threat. Instead, he received silence. His contacts stopped answering. His suppliers fell behind. His trucks got flagged for inspections, not seized, just delayed. He bled out through paper cuts. Later, someone found him running a billiards hall in Torino. Bald, bitter, and unaware of how perfectly his downfall had been orchestrated. He blames bureaucracy. But that was Pasquale, too. Many people still think that Pasquale vanished because of the heat from Operation Crimine. But the truth is more complicated. Crimine was only the punctuation mark, the last loud sound before he stepped fully into the margins. You see, power had never really excited Pasquale. Control did, but not in the loud, bloody way people imagine. He wasn't drawn to fear. He was drawn to scale, to the beauty of systems that correct themselves when built just right. And Operation Crimine, for all its thunder, never touched him directly. It rattled windows, toppled chairs. But Pasquale, he was already in the tunnel, already observing from below. When names were read on warrants, his was spoken with uncertainty. When photographs were pinned to corkboards, his face was always the oldest one available, grainy, soft, out of date. They called him the ghost accountant, the vanishing hand. But in Calabria, people knew better. There's a phrase whispered again, an old one, revived. He's the gravity under the table, the thing that holds it all still. Back above the tunnel, The vineyard continues to yield. Grapes are harvested by men who don't know the owner. The bottles are sold under a dozen different boutique labels. Sommeliers in Florence praise their mysterious mineral tension. No one traces the profits, because the profits don't exist, not on paper. They cycle, drip-fed into other vines, housing, tech, infrastructure. Not drugs anymore. That's been outsourced. Pasquale moved on. Do you remember the bishop who once came to dine, quietly thankful for a donation he never officially received? That bishop retires quietly this year. His successor is younger, more ambitious, but also more exposed. Pasquale watches from a distance, sends no message. But a week later, a real estate donor with ties to the diocese retracts a promised gift. The bishop backs off a controversial appointment. Coincidence? No, just recalibration. Pasquale doesn't correct with confrontation. He adjusts externalities until the target feels the wind change and takes cover instinctively. There's a single radio in the tunnel. Old. Analog. Tied into a broadcast loop that plays classical music and, once a day, the news from abroad. Pasquale listens without reacting. Stock markets, elections, floods. None of it changes his pacing, because his empire doesn't rise or fall with headlines. It bends around them. One night, while scribbling in a small leather notebook, he writes a phrase. The best kind of disappearance is when they remember you exactly wrong, because at this point, the myths have outpaced the man. They say he's dead, that he faked a terminal illness, that he lives in Venezuela under a new name, that he was buried in a vineyard by the men he trusted most. Each of these stories serves a purpose. Each one cloaks the truth. He never left. He simply sank under the surface of the system he built, and when he finally walks out of the tunnel, into the blue morning light of Calabria, he's just a man in a jacket. No one of note, but the vines seem to lean slightly in his direction. The espresso arrives in a white ceramic cup, chipped along the rim. It's served on a tray with no spoon and no sugar, just the way Pasquale likes it. The cafe is tucked into a side street in Milito di Porto Salvo, a place so inconspicuous it might as well be invisible. There's no sign, no music, just the occasional clink of dishes from the back and the low hum of the cooler that's been failing for 3 years. Pasquale sits near the window, but not too close. His coat is folded neatly on the back of the chair. A newspaper sits in front of him, unread, beside a small notepad filled with lines, arrows, and names that would mean nothing to anyone else. One name has been circled twice, Maurizio. Maurizio is new, too eager, talks with his hands too much, thinks charm is strategy. He's been pushing into logistics, trying to handle both sides of a shipment route. That's not how balance works. That's how bottlenecks start. Pasquale isn't angry, he's calculating. He writes one word beside the name, redirect. No punishment, just friction. A few phone calls, a missed meeting, a contract that doesn't come through. Within weeks, Maurizio will decide, on his own, that logistics isn't for him. He'll return to restaurant fronts, where his flair can do less damage. This is how Pasquale maintains the machine. Not with threats, with nudges. Like a conductor who corrects the tempo without touching the baton. Do you remember that shipment from Turkey that arrived 4 hours early? The one that carried more than furniture? It triggered a cascade of quiet corrections, shifts in schedules, silence in ports, whispers in customs. Pasquale didn't say much, but everyone who mattered felt it, like an unseen tide pulling at their heels. Now, years later, that same corridor hums again. The crates move as they should. The inspectors glance and pass. The noise is gone. All because Pasquale took 3 days to sit still, drink espresso, and write 8 names on a napkin. 8 names. 8 lives quietly adjusted. Many people still think the key to his success was in his ledgers. But really, it's in his pace. He never rushes, never reacts. He watches others burn themselves out chasing the present. Pasquale, instead, predicts the future and waits for it to arrive. There's a seaside chapel nearby, abandoned, half-crumbling, perched above a cliff that smells of salt and rust. Pasquale visits once a month, not for prayer, for perspective. He sits on the back pew, hands folded, as if listening to some inner service. He looks at the stone altar, the dust floating through shafts of light, and imagines all the men who once knelt here, begging for forgiveness, for protection, for power. Pasquale kneels for none, but he understands why they did. In a world built on shadows, he is gravity, quiet, consistent, indifferent to hope or fear. And in this chapel, with the sea pounding below and no one nearby, he does something rare. He closes his eyes. When he opens them again, he has the next month mapped. A shift in Palermo, a retraction in Genoa, a recalibration of interest rates in the shell company that funds half of the southern construction efforts. Do you remember the school teacher from Lockery, the one who now runs a consultancy firm with perfect payroll timing? That man's wife receives a letter in the mail that week. Inside, a voucher for a week's stay in a Ligurian villa. No sender listed, but she accepts. And while they're gone, a single ledger is retrieved from their attic and replaced with a newer version. Corrected, updated, sanitized. Pasquale doesn't trust digital systems. He believes in rotation, in controlled obsolescence, because when something is replaced smoothly, no one misses it. No one looks for it. The perfect disappearance. He scribbles in his notebook later that night. Maurizio settled. Graziano still distant. Maria, surprising insight. Maria is his latest interpreter. Not in language, but in pattern. A young woman from Reggio who organizes his courier schedules without ever asking questions. She's beginning to see the curve of things. She notices what time documents arrive, not just what they say. She's valuable. But more than that, she's aligned. Pasquale believes in alignment. Believes people shouldn't be forced into roles, but rather rotated into positions that make their instincts useful. He never tells Maria that she's passed the test. He just begins to use her more often. The vines at the vineyard turn gold this time of year. The roots thicken, the soil hardens, and the air smells of approaching rain. Pasquale walks the rows slowly, hands behind his back, letting the wind speak. There's a small box buried near the 3rd row from the west. Inside, 1 USB stick, 3 documents printed in pale ink, and a photograph of a man smiling with his hand over a map. It's not a threat. It's a memory vault. Pasquale doesn't trust himself to remember everything forever, but he trusts the placement of things. He trusts the landscape. And the tunnel? Still intact, still untouched, still ready. Do you remember how he once used a vineyard, not for harvest, but for exit strategy? That hasn't changed. What's changed is his need to use it. He no longer plans to run. He plans to fade, but not yet. For now, he has a dinner planned with an architect who doesn't know who he's really meeting. The meal will be quiet, the conversation subtle, and by the end, the architect will walk away thinking it was his idea to delay the coastal development contract. Pasquale will finish his meal, pay in cash, leave no receipt. He'll walk alone, back to the apartment with the broken blinds and the radio that only plays old jazz. He'll remove his shoes. He'll write 2 lines. Weather's shifting. Good. Time to wind down. Then he'll sit in the dark and let the silence hold him. The first time anyone mentions a tunnel beneath Pasquale Condello's vineyard is by accident. It comes from an offhand remark. One too many glasses of wine. A little too much trust in the quiet night air. A cousin of a cousin, trying to impress a woman in a bar near Catanzaro, mutters something like, "He's got exits under the grapes." The woman laughs, but someone nearby hears, and within a week whispers begin. Most would panic. Install cameras. Confront the source. "Pasquale?" He sends 2 crates of vintage Barbera to the bar owner with a note. The roots run deep. That's it. No threats, no silencing, just acknowledgement, because he knows something the rest don't. You don't defend a secret by denying it. You defend it by surrounding it with myth. From then on, the story grows. The tunnel becomes a legend. Some say it stretches to the coast. Others claim it leads straight into a bishop's cellar. Someone insists there are 3 identical Pasquales who rotate through safe houses underground. He lets them talk, because the more elaborate the fantasy, the safer the truth becomes. Meanwhile, he returns to the vineyard with measured calm. The tunnel's real, of course, but it doesn't lead anywhere glamorous. It opens into a damp, windowless room with nothing but a bench, a stack of papers, and a 1990s transistor radio that only picks up 2 stations. One broadcasts church bells, the other static. He sits in that room now, thumbing through a thin sheaf of documents recently smuggled in from Genoa. Not contraband, not cash, blueprints. Someone is building near Reggio's southern rail line. A new customs checkpoint. Pasquale studies it not with paranoia, but with possibility. He draws 3 lines, circles a warehouse location, then writes, timing window, 12:20 to 13. That's how he works now, by folding future corridors into current plans, predicting the direction pressure will come from, and building in vents. Do you remember how he once described power as the ability to absorb? This is absorption in motion. He doesn't resist the checkpoint. He integrates it. Next week, a customs official will receive a sudden family inheritance. Nothing large, just enough to allow early retirement. His replacement? A cousin of a lawyer who once shared espresso with Pasquale in Naples. Exactly 5 years ago to the day. That's not luck. That's rhythm, and the rhythm holds. Across the straits in Messina, a mid-level trafficker is found wandering a parking structure, mumbling numbers and dates. He's been compromised, not by interrogation, by math. His books were intentionally salted with false ledgers. A test. He failed. Pasquale hears the story and says nothing, but he underlines a name in his notebook. Pietro. Pietro vouched for the man. That doesn't mean punishment. It means observation. Pasquale changes Pietro's responsibilities. Quietly. Shifts his logistics from seafood to textiles. Fewer variables. Tighter routes. More traceable behavior. Pietro never realizes he's being evaluated again. Many people still think that power is in who speaks loudest. But in Pasquale's world, power lies in who gets reassigned without being told why. He once wrote, "The man who notices the correction too late learns not to repeat it. The man who never notices becomes safe." That's the balance. That's the filter he now uses for everything. He no longer sits in meetings. He receives outcomes, short recaps delivered by trusted runners, none of whom know the full picture. His hands rarely touch a document more than once. If it lingers, it's no longer useful. He changes pens every Monday. Not for superstition, for discipline. He shreds notes with his own hands, never delegating the disposal of memory. And when he sleeps, he does so beneath a ceiling fan set to the lowest speed. the breeze barely strong enough to lift the edge of a page. It reminds him of wind moving through vines, of soft warning. He wakes at 4:40 a.m. almost every morning, makes black coffee, 3 steps from the sink to the window. Always 3. Then he listens, not for noise, but for stillness, because the absence of disruption is his first confirmation. The system is still holding, and if one day that changes, the tunnel remains, silent, ready. The bishop arrives just past dusk, his collar loosened, the air thick with jasmine and the scent of something older, incense or guilt, maybe both. He walks alone through the outer garden of the vineyard, holding a folded umbrella, though the sky shows no signs of rain. A moth circles the light above the door, and Pasquale watches from the window with quiet curiosity. He didn't invite the man, not formally, but the bishop is here, which means the message was received. Pasquale opens the door himself. No words exchanged. Inside, they sit at the wooden table where contracts are never signed, only considered. A bottle of mineral water is opened, but not poured. The bishop sets down a leather pouch. Its contents, sealed letters, unsigned donations, maybe even a list of names, remain untouched. It's not the contents that matter, it's the gesture. Pasquale nods once. The bishop begins. He speaks in careful terms. Mentions a youth shelter in La Masia that needs repairs. A foundation that's running out of funding. A priest who's been reassigned for reasons best left unspoken. Pasquale listens, index finger tracing the rim of his glass. He asks no questions. When the bishop finishes, Pasquale says, "The priest. He talks too much. Send him north." The bishop nods. They share dinner in silence. Lentils and bread, no wine. Do you remember the phrase Pasquale used once? "I don't drink what clouds the edges." He meant it literally and metaphorically. He values clarity more than celebration. Even now, as the bishop leaves with a nod and no handshake, the air feels cleaner. Later, a donation arrives through 3 shell organizations. The shelter is renovated. The bishop is praised. The priest disappears, and no one connects the dots. This is how Pasquale offers blessing, with no sermon, no cathedral, only stillness. The clergy know not to name him, but they know. Back in the house, Pasquale makes a single note. Faith prefers form over flair. He's been writing a series of observations, never published, never shared, just notes on how systems operate. Some are about crime, some about faith, some about the places they blur. A few examples. Influence fades fastest when it's measured in gratitude. A man with purpose cannot be seduced. True loyalty isn't seen. It's calculated by absence. The observations stack up. Small squares of paper tucked into books, old envelopes, behind cabinet doors. If anyone ever found them all, they might mistake it for a manifesto. But Pasquale doesn't write to be read. He writes to record, to map not events, but temperatures, emotional barometers of a world where feeling and power are forever tangled. In Locri, a new group begins flexing. Young, brash, connected to foreign capital. They flash cars, speak English in their meetings, even hire consultants. Pasquale doesn't interfere. He watches. When their 3rd shipment vanishes at a port in Sardinia, they blame customs. When their lawyer is caught with contradictory paperwork, they blame bad luck. When their funding dries up overnight, they blame betrayal. But the truth is simple. Pasquale didn't crush them. He simply removed 3 support beams they didn't know were load-bearing. One was an old man who insured their warehouse licenses. Another, a courier who managed their paper trails. The third, a woman in Vienna who processed offshore invoices, all removed with silence. No confrontation, No message, just subtraction. Many people still think Pasquale disappeared because he feared arrest. But no. He disappeared because his system no longer required him to appear. That's not fear. That's fulfillment. At the vineyard, a letter arrives the next morning. Handwritten. No return address. Inside, a photo of the bishop standing with a group of children, all smiling, their arms around him like he's family. Pasquale stares at the photo for a long time, then folds it twice, places it in the back of his notebook, makes no entry that day, because not every variable needs measuring. Some just prove the formula. In a villa halfway up the slope toward Gambari, where pine trees hush the wind and the fog doesn't so much fall as linger, 3 men kneel, not in fear, not in worship, but in respect. They're not young. Their knees crack. Their shoulders are stiff from years of carrying other people's decisions. But here, before Pasquale, they're not bosses. They're students. The room is bare. A wood stove breathes quietly in the corner. One light bulb swings slightly, casting slow arcs of shadow. Pasquale doesn't sit on a throne. He stands behind a narrow table, arms folded. The same wool jacket he's worn since the mid-2000s, still draped neatly on a hook. The lesson tonight isn't about numbers. It's about timing. Pasquale lays out 3 envelopes. Inside each is a hypothetical. One involves a delayed shipment through a compromised rail line. Another, a money courier intercepted with falsified documents. The third, a regional politician asking for too much too fast. He asks the men, which situation ends itself if left alone. Only one answers correctly. The youngest hesitates. Pasquale notices. He doesn't scold, just says pressure is like water. Apply it wrong and it floods. Apply it right and it carves. Later that night, that same man will walk out into the cold with something new in his eyes. Not knowledge. Permission. Pasquale doesn't anoint successors. He allows gravity to pull the right ones closer. Those who need titles won't last. Those who seek structure, those who see systems, stay. Do you remember when younger bosses began calling him Il Bilanciere, the balancer? That title wasn't earned in ceremony. It was whispered into being. And now, those whispers come with offerings. A report from Vibo Valentia, dry and well-written, outlines a potential move into clean energy contracts, legitimate fronts, deep funding, government subsidies. The idea comes from a man who's never met Pasquale, but knows enough to send the proposal through silence. No cover letter, just the details. Pasquale reads it in the vineyard house, circles 4 figures in red, then underlines a phrase. Assumes political will. He writes beside it, never assume movement from wind. The next day, a funding freeze hits the regional development office. Not fatal, just cooling. Pasquale knows how to stall ideas long enough that they expire naturally. He believes in allowing entropy to do half the work. Elsewhere, in Bologna, a middle-tier broker begins asking questions about old names, the kind that shouldn't be spoken aloud. Pasquale doesn't respond with silence this time. He responds with presence. A man seated beside the broker on a regional flight to Bari. The man never introduces himself, never speaks. He just reads a newspaper with a headline the broker recognizes too well. Contractor linked to port scandal found missing. The broker lands, resigns his position, takes a sabbatical to visit his mother in Avellino. Pasquale never hears his name again. Many people still think that succession in the Ndrangheta is built on blood. That power passes like inheritance. But Pasquale has proven another model, osmosis. You don't hand down a system. You make it understandable only to those who already think that way. And when they finally think like the system, it runs without you. That's the goal. At night, Pasquale writes shorter entries. No reply needed. Silvana adjusted on her own. Bridges in Genoa fragile? Good. Gaspari, indirect path preferred. No elaboration, just cues, because the system now holds the rest. Do you remember the theory? That Pasquale rewrote not just operations, but the culture of organized crime in Calabria. That he turned bloodlines into business lines. That theory isn't taught, but it's felt. Every new affiliate who learns to wait. Every old one who learns to shut up. Pasquale's influence is no longer measured in actions. It's measured in tone. In Palermo, someone asks if he's dead. In Naples, someone replies, "No, he's just better than us." And in Reggio, where it all began, a child walks past a vineyard and points at a man tending the vines. His grandfather says, "Don't look too long." That one doesn't wave. The child forgets the moment, but the vines remember. They always do. They call it Operazione Crimine. Operation Crime. It sounds bold, theatrical, like something you'd see splashed across Italian tabloids or whispered about by ex-cops on radio shows. And for a moment, it is all that. Dozens of names, faces on corkboards, flights of journalists rushing to Calabria, politicians thumping podiums, arrests, wiretaps, raids. But somewhere behind all the sirens, somewhere deeper in the machine, Pasquale Condello remains motionless, not absent, just not mentioned. At first, that seemed strange. He was known. Not loud, not visible, but present enough in whispers, financial trails, and legend. Yet his name doesn't headline any dossier. His photo isn't displayed at the press conference. No officer steps up to say, "We got him," because they didn't. Pasquale saw Crimine coming long before the door-kicking started. Not from leaks, not from informants, but from shifts. The kind of shifts only someone like him sees. The phone calls that got just slightly shorter. The prosecutors that stopped looking tired. The news cycle that began repeating the word Ndrangheta with a little more certainty. He didn't need confirmation. He needed only the tone. And so, months before Operation Crimine becomes headline news, Pasquale does what he's always done best. He vanishes. Not all at once. That would be noisy. He fades in layers. First, the known properties, liquidated or leased under new ownership. Then, the old couriers, replaced with younger ones who don't even know who they're working for. Then, the meeting points, disbanded, repurposed, erased. He stops writing in his old notebooks, switches to ciphered dictation recorded on analog tape, stored inside cassette players that look broken but aren't. He lets 3 of his front-facing contacts get caught. Not because they're careless, but because they're strategic losses. Distraction. Noise. Do you remember how he used to test loyalty by mislabeling crates? This is the same principle. Scaled up. He leaks pressure to the obvious corners so the hidden ones remain dark. And it works. Operation Crimine explodes across Calabria like a storm. The press call it the most significant blow to the Ndrangheta in decades. Hundreds are arrested. Courtrooms overflow. But Pasquale? He's a ghost in every file. Some investigators insist his name was deliberately scrubbed. Others argue he'd already retired. A few speculate, quietly, that he was the one who fed information to spark the operation in the first place. So what do you think? Could the man who ran everything in silence decide one day to collapse the parts that had grown too loud? There's a theory that Crimine didn't catch Pasquale because Crimine was Pasquale. That it was a pruning, not a purge. That he removed what no longer served him by letting law enforcement do what he refused to waste time doing. It's never proven, but in a quiet cafe in Bologna, a retired carabinieri officer meets a friend over espresso. Midway through their conversation, he mutters, "I think we did his job for him." His friend doesn't answer, because sometimes silence is safer. Meanwhile, in a coastal house near Brancaleone, a curtain is pulled back just slightly. Pasquale peers out, sees two boys playing football in the street, hears the clatter of dishes from a neighbor's window. Then he lets the curtain fall. He hasn't been seen in weeks, months by some counts, but shipments still arrive, ledgers still balance. Quiet deals are still struck across Europe and South America, each one carrying the fingerprint of a mind that left no prints. He receives updates through gestures now, a bottle of wine left at a certain door in Naples, a bank transfer completed at a specific hour, a cargo truck parked facing west instead of east. Each one says, "We're still listening." And he continues refining absence into an instrument. One late night, he makes an entry in a slim, leather-bound book, the first in weeks. Crimine has passed. The system remains. No need for repair, only observation. He closes the book, places it back into a hollowed-out brick in the fireplace. Then he does what few men of his stature ever learn to do. He rests. The espresso comes hot, bitter, and still trembling in the cup when Pasquale drinks it alone on the patio. It's mid-morning. Coastal sunlight cuts long shadows across cracked terracotta tiles. A single olive tree rustles in the wind beside him. There's no movement in the street. No sound but the soft clink of the spoon tapping porcelain. It's his final espresso in public. He doesn't know that yet. But later, when people speak of his disappearance, they'll mark this moment as the last time anyone saw him in the open. The waitress remembers nothing unusual. He paid in cash, tipped modestly, didn't look rushed. Just another man, older perhaps, dressed well but not lavishly, glancing occasionally at the breeze moving a plastic chair across the patio. He didn't even finish the drink. A minute later, he stood, adjusted the sleeves of his jacket, walked down a narrow path between two hedges, and was gone. No security camera footage, no sightings, no footprints, just absence. It's not dramatized. No cloak, no coded signal. He simply vanishes in the same way he lived, deliberately, quietly, beneath notice. What's more fascinating is what happens after. The usual chain of inquiries begins, slow, reluctant, then frantic. Calls aren't returned. A courier arrives at a locked door. One of his farmhouses appears to have been emptied, but nothing's missing, not even the wine. In fact, 3 bottles were added. An accountant checks a routine transfer and finds the ledger closed with a perfect balance. No trailing decimals, no odd footnotes. Just a page that reads, "Final reconciliation entered." No deficit. It's not a message. It's a closing statement. And still, shipments move, routes adjust, meetings are held, though no longer in his name. They happen naturally, subtly, like gravity continuing after the apple falls. One man says he left us a rhythm. We just follow the beat. Do you remember how Pasquale believed in exit tunnels but not in running? That's because this was never about escape. It was about completion. He didn't run. He concluded, there's no evidence of death, no grave, no fingerprints turning up in foreign cities. Just the quiet suggestion that Pasquale has taken one step further into abstraction. Now, everyone sees him where he isn't. A fisherman swears he saw him buying sardines in Bari. A schoolteacher in Switzerland reports an old man with familiar eyes asking about train schedules. A customs officer in Crotone receives a birthday card signed PC. Each of these could be true, or they could be part of the myth. What's certain is that after that espresso, the world adapts to his absence without resistance. The system he built doesn't stutter. It smooths out. It autocorrects. And those who remain, those who once depended on his judgment, begin to find his lessons echoing in their decisions. One courier hesitates before rerouting a shipment, then remembers something Pasquale once said: "If the sea is rough, use the dock that no one watches." He takes the risk. The cargo lands. Everything moves on. Another associate discovers that an offshore account has been renamed Armonia Limited. A quiet nod, perhaps, to Pasquale's lifelong devotion to balance. An old woman in Saderno receives a package. Inside, her husband's war medals, long thought lost. No note. Just a folded linen handkerchief with the scent of citrus and dust. No one connects her to Pasquale, but she cries anyway. Many people still think that power ends when presence ends. But Pasquale proved otherwise. He didn't vanish like a man. He dissolved like a formula, used, applied, and carried forward in action. In a quiet town square weeks later, a man sits in the same cafe sipping an espresso. A stranger asks, "Is that seat taken?" The man smiles. It never really was. The vanishing act becomes legend almost overnight, not because it was flashy or sudden or particularly cinematic, but because it was perfectly timed. A departure that left no gaps in the gears, no flicker in the lights, just stillness, like a theater curtain descending in total silence. And for the people who'd moved around Pasquale for years, those who built their rhythms to his pulse, something strange begins to happen. They pause, not out of fear, not even confusion, but out of reverence. Because in Calabria, where the air carries memory the way stone carries heat, an absence like Pasquale's doesn't feel empty. It feels observed. In the hills above our door, a shepherd who once held lookout during Pasquale's late-night meetings lights a candle in a ruined chapel and says nothing for 20 minutes. When asked why, he shrugs. Something passed. Elsewhere, in a warehouse office in Milan, a mid-level broker finds a package waiting on his desk. An old calculator, the kind with the paper roll still inside. The display reads 0.00. He doesn't touch it, just closes the door. Even enemies hesitate. A man from an opposing clan, someone who'd long watched Pasquale's rise with the jealous resentment of an also-ran, refuses a bribe. Not because he fears discovery, but because he mutters, he might still be watching, and maybe he is. Because even now, financial trails shift subtly. Ledgers cross-clean themselves. Shell companies dissolve with no audit. A politician with too many friends in the wrong places withdraws his campaign with no explanation. These are not coincidences, they're echoes. Do you remember how Pasquale once said, "A system is working best when it doesn't notice the architect is gone"? This is that system. Running smooth, self-sustaining. A quiet article appears in a regional paper. Condello investigation quietly closed after lack of evidence. No fanfare, no editorials. Just a footnote of finality, but not everyone believes it. In a school in Rossano, a child hands a teacher a drawing. 3 men in coats standing under a vineyard, one with no face. When asked who it is, the child replies, "He's the man who knows what's under us." The teacher laughs, but the story spreads. In a Naples cafe, 2 men sit in the corner booth Pasquale once favored. One asks, "Do you think he's really gone?" The other responds without looking up, "Do you think it matters? Because here's the truth. Pasquale's greatest act wasn't vanishing. It was teaching others how to operate in his absence without realizing they were doing it. That's legacy, not remembered name, but remembered behavior. And those behaviors persist. One courier switches routes without instruction, avoiding a checkpoint that didn't exist until the next day. When asked how he knew, he just says, it felt like the kind of thing he'd expect. A woman managing a small network of properties in Spain gets a sudden audit notice. The next morning, she receives a set of real estate listings from a contact she doesn't recognize, each one tailored to exit the market cleanly. She follows them. The audit finds nothing. No one signs the letter, but she knows. Pasquale is no longer a figure. He's a framework. Many people still think of criminal power as a visible pyramid, a top, a base, a clear chain. But Pasquale inverted that. He created something horizontal, spread thin, layered, resilient, like root systems under old vines. They say he's in South America now, or Montenegro, or a monastery, or dead. But when a familiar type of wine shows up on a menu in Sao Paulo, delivered through a fake importer named Armonia Holdings, a few people in the know raise their eyebrows, and none of them ask. Instead, they toast quietly, no clink, just a nod. Because sometimes, when someone disappears completely, the world doesn't notice what's missing. It just starts to move. Smarter. The deeper you go into Calabria's interior, the quieter things get. There are hills where the birds don't sing until mid-morning. Villages where no one speaks unless spoken to. Churches that echo with the weight of things never confessed. And above all of it, stitched into the folds of olive groves and abandoned monasteries, is the understanding that sometimes silence isn't emptiness, it's protection. Pasquale Condello doesn't have to hide here. He's not pursued, he's preserved. In the town of Samo, an elderly man sweeps the steps of a shuttered bakery every morning. People say he's mute, that he once taught math in Reggio, that his brother was connected. No one asks him questions. One day, a police investigator from the north comes through, looking to follow up on unfinished trails left from Operation Crimin. He stays in the village for 48 hours. He's polite, curious, asks harmless questions. By the end of the second day, he checks out of his pensione early, leaves a note on the nightstand that reads, "Nothing here but stone and stories." And that's the thing. Calabria doesn't forget its own. Even the ghosts. The loyalty Pasquale cultivated wasn't built on fear or favors. It was built on continuity. He provided structure in a place where structure was otherwise imposed from the outside. In return, the hills keep him. Do you remember the woman from Saderno who received her husband's medals in the mail? She walks the market every Thursday now, head high, even though her rent is late and her son is out of work, because she knows someone's still watching, still keeping the weather calm. And that faith isn't just emotional, it's engineered. Pasquale anticipated this phase of his life long before it began. While others chased titles, he arranged invisibility like a retirement plan. Quiet properties held under names belonging to men who died before he was born. A maze of pensions, stipends, and small donations that move through postal accounts and disappear into pocket money. No one gets rich, but everyone gets steady. That's loyalty you don't have to buy twice. In a cafe in Bovellino, a teenage boy with new shoes tells his friend, "My uncle said the man still lives nearby, in the stone house with no name." His friend laughs. "Your uncle says dumb things." But 2 tables away, a man closes his notebook slowly and writes nothing. Because when you live in legend, denial is protection. A local butcher sees it differently. He tells a cousin over grappa, "The man's like the old saints, not seen but everywhere." Then he adds, "Better him than the ones they send from Rome." And there it is. Pasquale never had to command obedience. He became necessary. There's an old phrase in the villages, "Chi regge il silenzio, regge il potere." He who holds the silence holds the power. Pasquale holds it still. Even now, new players emerge. Faces change, roots adjust. But if you press any of the old ones, ask them where the decisions come from, really come from, they won't answer. Not because they don't know, but because they do. One of Pasquale's oldest contacts, a retired tax consultant, gets a letter every December. No return address. Just a line of poetry and a small voucher for a bookstore in Florence. The line is always different. This year's reads, "The sea hides its treasures beneath repetition." The man smiles. He's forgotten more than he remembers. But that line? He knows who sent it. He doesn't tell anyone. Many people still think Pasquale Condello lives because no one's confirmed his death. But that misses the point entirely. He lives because he's not needed to be seen. Because the structure works. Because the ghost still fits the architecture. And Calabria, it carries him like it carries its oldest legends. Not loudly, but faithfully. They call it a ghost in the books. Not a haunting. A presence. A pattern that appears and reappears in ledgers across 3 continents. Always indirect, always logical. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. But for those who know what to look for, it's unmistakable. A shift in payment timing. A tax filing that lands 2 days early every quarter. A false invoice that corrects itself before auditors arrive. These are not coincidences. They are Pasquale. Even now, in his supposed absence, the ledgers whisper of his touch. There's a crate that clears customs in Buenos Aires with no inspection. A transfer routed through 4 shell companies, 2 of which haven't officially existed in 5 years. A logistics firm in Rotterdam receives an overpayment. It's flagged. The next day, the excess is quietly returned with interest. The memo on the return reads simply, "Too loud." No one signs it, but the message lands. This is how he communicates now, through systems, through patterns, through imperfections so precise, they can only be deliberate. Do you remember when Pasquale first learned to cook books as a teenager? Sitting cross-legged in the corner of a tobacco shop, rearranging small cash bundles to reflect a version of truth that was more palatable? That boy never stopped rearranging. He just moved on to countries. A banker in Geneva opens an old safe deposit box, inactive for 7 years. Inside, 3 things. A ledger with 5 pages torn out. A single red coin. A note. Reconciled. He doesn't speak of it. He transfers departments within the week. In Toronto, a real estate developer notices a sudden drop in pressure from local inspectors. Permits that had been stalled for months are approved in 72 hours. He traces it back to an offshore entity, Armonia Holdings Limited. Again, every time it surfaces, it's tied to clean exits, subtle course corrections, or, in one case, a donation to a public library in Naples that's quietly matched by 3 anonymous patrons. These echoes aren't flukes, they're choices, because Pasquale didn't leave behind an empire. He left behind a logic. Many people still think criminal networks collapse without their heads. But the smartest heads build systems that don't need them. Like the architect who never lives in the building, just checks the foundations once in a while, and that's exactly what he's doing now. Not leading, guiding, not speaking, rebalancing. He appears in glitches, timing anomalies, discrepancies that favor longevity. A smuggler caught in Spain is released because a key witness retracted her statement after a mysterious wire payment to her cousin's business in Buenos Aires. That payment? Filed under export adjustment. One of Pasquale's old associates hears about it, says, "He's still out there." Another shrugs. Maybe, or maybe the world learned from him. That's the real trick, isn't it? Pasquale doesn't have to be active anymore. His systems are habitual, embedded in behavior. The courier networks still mimic his spacing. The accounting still folds like origami when under pressure. The silence between calls still echoes the pace he set 20 years ago. Even law enforcement adjusts for him. A Europol analyst includes possible Pasquale rhythm markers in her report, without defining what that means. Because you can't define a shadow. You only track the temperature drop it leaves behind. One night in Zurich, a man in his late 60s visits a watch repair shop. He waits quietly as the proprietor services a vintage wristwatch. No batteries, just gears. The man says nothing except, "Time isn't movement, it's correction." Then he pays in cash and disappears. The shopkeeper, when interviewed later about a different case, mentions the moment casually. The agent listening just writes a single word. Condello, but it leads nowhere, and so the story grows. He's seen in ferry terminals, in vineyards, on dusty back roads with a worn coat and a bag of groceries. Sometimes he walks with a limp. Sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he speaks in dialect. Sometimes not at all. But always, always, there's a ledger that balances itself soon after, because whether he's alive or not, Pasquale Condello has become the correction itself. It's nearly autumn now, and the vineyards of Calabria have begun their slow surrender to the season. Rows of ambered vines curling downward, their edges crisp, their soil quiet underfoot. The hills breathe a little slower. So do the people. And somewhere, just somewhere, Pasquale is said to be seen again. Not in the way tabloids dream of, with photos and quotes and hidden microphones. No, this sighting is softer. A man walking behind a mule cart, face turned from the road, adjusting the strap on his shoulder like someone who's carried weight most of his life, and figured out how to make it feel lighter. No one speaks to him. No one photographs him. But 5 kilometers away, a local tax record is updated with unusually accurate figures for a rural olive farm that hadn't filed in 8 years. Another correction. Because the truth is, Pasquale doesn't need to return. He never left. He's become the air between sentences, the margin in the ledger, the delay in the call that tells you whether to speak or keep your mouth shut. And maybe that was the plan all along. Do you remember how he used to say, "Every empire dies in its founder's image, unless the founder erases it from memory first"? It used to sound like philosophy. Now it sounds like autobiography. There's no celebration, no monument, no gold watch for the accountant who restructured Calabria's underworld into something self-regulating. Just empty chairs at quiet tables. Just decision makers who don't know they're quoting him. Just actions taken because they feel right, even when no one's asking why. In a business park in Belgium, a logistics firm notes an odd shift in its internal auditing software. Error flags that used to pop up weekly now self-resolve within the hour. When asked about it, the IT lead mutters, "Someone smarter than me wrote part of this system. We just maintain it." She doesn't know she's talking about Pasquale, but she is. In a Buenos Aires bookstore, a man receives a shipment of rare Italian texts. Inside one, tucked like an apology between the pages, is a receipt for a vineyard lease long believed lost to bank seizure. The man smiles, tears up the receipt, whispers something in Calabrian dialect no one else hears, because the message was never in the paper. It was in the timing. A few still wonder how it's possible for a man to disappear so thoroughly without breaking the machine he ran. But that question only reveals who wasn't paying attention. Pasquale wasn't the power. He was the calibration, like tuning a piano so finely that you can walk away, and the music still plays in tune for years. He gave them balance, not because they deserved it, not because it was right, but because he needed it. Order was his oxygen, and now everyone breathes it. There's a joke among old bosses now. Pasquale retired so hard he turned into a philosophy, and maybe they're not wrong. His name is taught in hushed mentorships, where new recruits learn not just how to move, but when to stay still. Where silence is framed not as weakness, but as leverage. Where every transaction includes a moment of stillness, a pause, as if listening for something older, slower, wiser. They're not waiting for his return. They're waiting to understand what he would have done, Because sometimes the most powerful legacy isn't wealth or territory or fear, it's clarity. And Pasquale Condello gave that to them in small, sharp doses until they no longer needed to be reminded. So what do you think? Did he fade into myth? Or did he simply finish building the one structure no law could dismantle? A system that doesn't need a name at the top. The story ends where it began. In Calabria, under low-hanging clouds, where the roads twist like secrets, and the air carries the warmth of things unspoken. Here, in a stone house barely mapped by satellite, something still breathes quietly. No guards, no gates, just a single wooden door that creaks as though remembering other times. A shutter hangs open. On the sill, a small ledger sits with its cover closed, a dry olive branch laid gently across its spine. The windows never light up at night, but once a month, a young boy on a motorbike arrives with groceries. Bread, salt, tinned fish, and always, always 3 clementines. He never knocks. Leaves the bag on the stone step, lights a cigarette, waits 2 minutes, then rides back down the gravel road without turning around. No one pays him, yet he keeps returning, and far away. In Brussels, in Buenos Aires, in the quiet coastal lanes of Bari, balances keep correcting, like echoes catching up to themselves. Pasquale Condello doesn't need to appear. He's become a template, not of fear or force, but of rhythm, of stillness. He taught a generation that disappearing wasn't cowardice. It was the highest form of mastery. Because do you remember the one rule he always lived by? If they can describe you, they can predict you. If they can predict you, they can reach you. So become a shape they can't measure. And now he is exactly that. Some say he died years ago on a quiet walk near the Aspromonte woods, that a heart attack took him and the earth swallowed him without ceremony. Others believe he's alive in another name, sending quiet instructions through old banking queues and legacy codes hidden in financial software written in the 90s. Then there are those who say, simply, that he became the silence. And perhaps they're all right, because what remains is not a body or a voice, but a design. One that continues to function without the man who conceived it. A single call in Buenos Aires leads to a crate moving in Hamburg. A port official in Gioia Tauro turns away for a cigarette at just the right moment. A rural clinic in Saderno receives a surprise donation of 3 ultrasound machines. From a private source, nothing traced, nothing forced, just aligned. Even the hills seem to lean a little differently now. One night, in a crumbling churchyard, an old priest finds a sealed envelope beneath the altar. No name, no seal. Inside, a note. Order isn't the absence of chaos. It's the illusion of choice beneath control. No signature. But the priest smiles anyway, because he knows. We all know. Pasquale Condello didn't retire. He retreated into function. And perhaps that's the ultimate vanishing act. Not to slip away and be forgotten, but to become so integral that the world carries on by instinct. Every small adjustment echoing his intent. There will be no movie, no funeral, just motion, just stillness, just balance, and maybe, just maybe, as you drift to sleep tonight, you'll feel it. That subtle correction, that quiet recalibration, as if the world is exhaling through clenched teeth. He's still here, just harder to measure now. So now, as the story fades like footsteps down a gravel path, let's ease into stillness together. You've just walked through decades of whispers, through ledgers that corrected themselves, through myths that wore suits and disappeared mid-sentence. The world of Pasquale Condello wasn't loud. It was careful. It didn't need volume to shake things loose. It only needed timing. Let that idea rest with you for a moment. The notion that true influence is quiet, that control doesn't always announce itself, and that some of the most powerful acts are the ones that vanish on purpose. Feel your body soften now. Loosen your jaw. Uncurl your fingers. Let your thoughts wander, but not too far. Just enough to let the weight of the day dissolve into the dark. Outside, imagine the wind moving through olive branches. Imagine the sea humming at the edge of the land. No alarms, no headlines, just rhythm, balance, correction. If silence had a signature, maybe it would feel like this. Inhale slowly and release it. The story's done. But the stillness remains. You don't need to hold anything now. Just the breath. Just the peace that follows it. Pasquale is gone. But the quiet he left behind, that part you get to keep. Good night.